look in the braiding process in DNA. When you have bliss, the phase cascade of your EKG, EEG allows the recursive braiding of the DNA to create an envelope within an envelope where the wavelength of this braid is embedded in the wavelength of this braid with recursive phase discipline. That results in a condition in the DNA which is ultimately probably toroidal, based on the seventh recursive braid, makes a donut, causing implosion. And we suggested that that was the physics of the Lord of the Ring. Yes? That why the alphabet on the side of the ring donut, Hungarian Finnish, was from Alpha Draconis, which is a software environment for teaching genes, DNA, to absorb charge, because at the symmetry point of the helix, where the DNA is actually eating the charge field that causes it to grow, the codons are arranged tetrahedrally, and that's the origin of the tetra alphabets, like Hebrew, and that controlled DNA's ability to swallow charge. And then we discussed the fact that when that was recursive, that torus donut would implode, here's the toroidal DNA, squirting charge through the speed of light, which is how DNA makes gravity. We discussed Gergelyev's work in Russia, measuring phantom DNA and black hole making in DNA, so that DNA is measurably a gravity-making device. So this is the background, that if you can generate the conditions to ignite DNA, you can become a star navigator. You can become worth a high salary in the dragon culture. Yes? You get the good bucks. So the skill to do that is, say again?
You get more gill plants. You get to eat more pineal glands of mere humans.
You get to use more of the resources of the galaxy and harvest DNA over many more planets. So the trick, the skill, the ability to create environments where DNA could be ignited became a galaxy-wide political drama. For example, the dragons, Asauru, who came here to Earth, were deeply concerned with generating the electrical conditions to ignite DNA. We talk about the Garden of Eden as a capacitor to prevent cellular aging. Yes? The Shem in the Bible, mistranslated, altar, actually was Highward Firestone. It's a capacitor to make a charge field to ignite DNA. The dragons inhabit the right caves because the correct caves have the capacitive field to ignite DNA. So, our theme now is how does the real principle of how DNA is ignited toward the power of gravity making and star inhabiting, which is the destiny of DNA. Our theme is how that ability to ignite DNA is reflected in the major events in the history, the recent history of DNA in our galactic sector. Yeah? So now we're about to embark on the story. The recent history of DNA in our galactic sector. Are you ready? Okay. Now, in the very distant past, many sources suggest there's something called the galactic core cultures. And the galactic core cultures, and I'm referring specifically to my teacher on Ophanim Enochian, VincentBridges.com, he talks about the galactic core cultures as being a group of cultures nearer to the galactic center who administrate the propagation of DNA across stars. And that they basically had an agenda which had to do with the discovery of the role of DNA in stabilizing star birth. Okay, so the agenda here had to do with this discovery of the incredibly potent role of DNA in stabilizing star evolution. We're trying to begin to understand why stars go through so much work to make DNA. Obviously, stars evolve a kind of intelligence that makes stellar evolution sustainable, self-organizing, fractal, opposite to chaos. And stars apparently do a lot of work to evolve life systems like ours, and we have to ask in terms of simple energy efficiency, what is the reason that stars go to so much work to make DNA? And I'm suggesting to you that the secret and mystery there is that DNA makes the gravity that hold stars together. This is a new hypothesis I suggest we entertain seriously. And this forms a kind of substance background to our story. For example, one aspect of that story is, if you read Reiki Reikop's story of the Golden Ones, he's saying that our seraphim, dragon ancestors, went 300 years into our future and found that for light years around the solar system, stars began blowing up, disintegrating. And that, this is called the Golden One story, soulinvitation.com/origins. And there, having discovered that star systems are blowing up, they went backwards in time to try to find the root of the problem. And they traveled backwards in time until they arrived at our time epoch here on Earth and discovered genetic engineering. And they discovered that when we started cutting up DNA from Sumeria till now, that was the beginning of the problem of stars falling apart. So a direct connection between DNA that's not set free and stars falling apart. Now that story, the Golden Ones, ends with those advanced high-winged dragons going backwards in time about 300 years in Groundhog Day motion to weld themselves back onto their own DNA and establish Sumeria to fix the bloodline of their own mistake. Like Groundhog Day, let's get it right now, let's get it right now. DNA is here for something. Maybe we shouldn't hack it up. Because DNA is required to make stars work. Now we want to understand more about the depth of that story, and that's kind of where we're going with this. We're saying that gene pools make a substance which is critical to stellar evolution. Which something like when Doris Lessing says, in the Sufi tradition, in the Syrian Experiments and Briefing for a Descent into Hell, if you've looked at any of Doris Lessing's Sufi books, she said, human condition makes something called the substance of we feeling, which is a sticky substance which holds things together. Ooh, what is this substance? So we're looking at this mystery of the importance of creating gene pools to inhabit stars, otherwise they fall apart. Another example we'll get to later in our story is in Atlantis, when they used the Tuoi stone, the fire crystal, to enslave people, and they phase-locked their grid, immediately after a large number of people were enslaved, huge earthquakes occurred in which the tectonic plates fell apart and gravity destabilized. And I'm suggesting that there's a direct electrical connection between large numbers of people that are enslaved, and therefore their electric aura is no longer self-steering, and as a result their gravity field falls apart. A direct connection. That's what we're investigating here. Yes, so Atlantis fell literally because a whole race of people had been enslaved, and so gravity could no longer be self-organizing. What is the meaning of that part of the story? We want to investigate the role of DNA in the evolution of stars. This is the background, okay? Specifically, when gene pools become enslaved, when people no longer become self-directing psychologically because their aura is no longer imploding to suck in charge to enable them to steer their own aura, the result of that enslavement is chaos electrically, including the destabilization of gravity. We want to investigate this story so we can understand the potential of our own gene pool, and for that reason we're taking this time to tell the story of the galactic core cultures seeding stars with DNA. What was their agenda? What were their methods? And how did this result in the Orion Wars? We're going with this, obviously, is when our ancestors said the only ETs that are worth talking to are onto the sun gods. And they're the ones whose DNA, there's electric field of presence arrived through the heart of the sun. So if they came, your friendly ETs arrived in heavy metal, you know they're from the wrong side of the tracks. They're messy. They're parasites. Whereas if they arrived through the heart of the sun, they're interesting. Talk to them. They're called sun gods. So Tuatha De Danann, Antu, Anunnaki, all these words with An in it, Daniel, means sun god. So who the heck is a sun god? it's obviously someone whose biologic charge field is able to inhabit the heart of a star and stabilize the gravity there. So, in the big picture of these things, we have to grow up to inhabit stars or we can't grow up. That's the hypothesis. And we're looking at the electrical nature of that evolution, and we're trying to piece together the history. Okay, now, history story. The story is that among the galactic core cultures, there evolved a disagreement or a difference of opinion about the best way to seed stars with DNA. In other words, there we are going around. It said, for example, that the Dracu had seeded 300 star systems in the Orion sector with DNA. And there was a disagreement about the best way to grow up. It's just like a disagreement among farmers about the best way to fertilize their crop. Yeah? And this agreement came to be called Aku-Dracu. Akhenaten, Draco, Draco. Which is parallel to the story of Othanim and Seraphim and Lucifer Aramonic, Michaelic versus Luciferic. So this difference of opinion became in religious history called the war in heaven. And this difference of opinion became fractal then later when we're on Sirius A and we have a certain family. The grandfather was called Alalu, and he was a former king, and a guy named Anu, or Antu, had a little wrestling match in which he cut off the balls of the former king Alalu, and this guy became king, Antu, on Sirius A. Now, we're picking a certain time in this evolution, in this story, to freeze a fractal of these giant Orion wars. And the time we're picking is the story of Sirius A and the evolution of the Nibiru story, Nibiru. So how did we get from here to here? Okay. What's happening here is that a culture that we can call Draco, or in a large sense reptilian, and we know there are lots of different branches of the reptilian culture. And believe me, we're not saying that all reptiles are bad. That's not the point here at all. But that the Draco reptilian culture had conquered a high percentage of the inhabitable planetoids in the Orion sector. This is the background of our story. And in the ancient times, this dragon race, which is called Seraphim or Uru, and Uru means giant or ancient dragon one, as in Uru Shalayim, which is Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem. And Uru Asa LM is the place where the female queens of, Asa means female queen of, Uru means ancient dragon one in the sense of Ursprung, or Uruan, or Roman, or Dine Asa Ura, dinosaur, or Asa Uru of Asuras, or Azores. That all comes from this ancient root of Asa Uru. These are the ancient dragon queens, yeah? Asa Uru, yeah? And this bloodline was also in the sense of the ancestor of the An, or sun god. You have the winged high dragons, high seraphim, who were called Archon, in the sense of archangel, and literally Arkansas, literally. Bill Clinton, Arkansas, that's the root, Archon. And Archon here meant, you could think of it as winged dragon or high dragon. These were, for example, it is said that the giant lenticular clouds, extremely organized clouds that look like living beings you see over Mount Shasta, that these are the precipitant electric charge field of a winged dragon. Yeah? And the winged dragon guarding a giant dragon's egg, Humpty Dumpty, at Bucharest is one of these. They're trying to fix their eggs so they can get Humpty Dumpty back, you know. And that egg is, in fact, the ability to reassemble DNA to implosion. And we talked about the physics of how an egg gets charge from gravity and gets a soul, so they're trying to fix Humpty Dumpty's egg, the dragon's egg story. So these are the high dragons. So the high side of the dragon is becomes the story of Aku versus Dracu, Ophanim, the Luciferic, and the winged ones. This, in the local part of this story, becomes Ebi versus Uru. Ebi meaning bird, and Uru meaning snake. You ask the Aboriginals who the two brothers were of the ancient gods. It's the bird god and the snake god. And when the bird holds the snake, and so we have a remnant of the bird brain, which needs to be fed by the snake brain, so the bird has to hold the snake by the throat and pump the juice, the venom, the testosterone. And when the snake brain feeds the bird brain, Quetzalcoatl returns. A description of Kundalini, basically. So all of this is in the genetic ancestry here that we need to understand the local politics thereof. And the basic story here, and by the way, this is kind of the story of wingmakers.com here as well. For those of you who are familiar with a wingmaker is someone who makes this, at wingmakers.com, and the solution in Wingmakers is something they call BST, which is blank state technology, interactive dynamic time travel. Only that can resist the arrival of the great parasite ETs, right? If we have the right kind of shaman, our gene pool gets an immune system. Well, they think that the interactive dynamic time travel here, which is the only defense we have against great parasite ETs, they think it's an electrical problem, but it's really a psychological problem. A shaman that has the chutzpah, to travel in time, wake up and fix the near future without screwing up the near past. That's called a tron.
Or in other words, quit blaming someone else and take responsibility for your own mess.
Well, but also in this sense, specifically a tron in the sense of Metatron or an electron. A tron refers to the ability to turn the cross through the speed of light fast enough that in your lucid dream, when you see how to go to the past to fix the future, you can see both at once fast enough so the time cops don't catch you. I mean, so that the event histories, if you meet yourself in the past and mess with it, then you screwed with yourself in the future, and you are screwed. Phase conjugation is how you got there. It's kind of a long story. But anyway, to have the beingness to do that kind of interactive dynamic time travel is a really high-level shaman. Their electric field is time penetrant. These are also called time lords. But the reason they have to fix the fabric of time, like you got a big bleeding wound in the fabric of time from Montauk, and all these grays come rushing in, the parasites, because time isn't fractal enough anymore when they cause it to bleed. And so it sounds complicated, but it's really quite simple. If your DNA was imploding and you're sending a signal through the speed of light, when you go faster than the speed of light, you must inhabit time. You would get here before the Earth got here next year in the rotation of the solar system. That's how you travel in time. Acceleration is time travel. Yeah? And so in the same way that space must be fractal to be inhabitable, also must time. So we're trying to set the context here. We're trying to set the context now that in this culture, the philosophy of this side, the family, the Dracu. Now remember, a seraphim is a high dragon, and a high seraphim has wings, Archon Siakar. And the other side of the family is specifically known as bird tribe. This is the return of the bird tribe here. Ebi, bird tribe, Ophanic, Aku, all synonyms really. In Iroquois, they're called bird tribe. In Cherokee, they're called Adawi. In Aboriginal Australia, in the Adnyamatna tribe, they're called Valnapa. An Apa and Apta. And this became the family line, which the Andromedans called Pa-Tal. Wings with a tail, which became our word later in Egypt, Ptah.
These two sounds, ah, ooh.
That's right, that's right. Ah, ooh. And But the PT in here was associated with pterodactyl and winged snake and reptile. The PT also refers to sept, sevenness. So PT is very profound there. The patal. The Andromedans call this, they call this 11th dimensional DNA. That's the way they describe it. In Alex Collier letter from Andromeda.com, which I worked with him personally fairly extensively. And so we can see, now we said, look, when the DNA finishes the 7th braid, it becomes 12 axis spin, 5 plus 7. So here the 11th, and they say this is the ancestors of Enki, whom we're about to talk about. So this is where we're going with this story, right here. So now in the local politics, where we have a fractal of these wars, the two sons of An, by different mothers, become Enlil, Enki and Enlil. And because this family contained a good fractal of these giant wars, you could breed a vaccine here, see? Now, we need to set the local story here for what happened. Here, this...
You said two different mothers from Anu.
That's exactly where we're going. The mother... The mother from Enki was Ida, and she was from Rigel in Orion, and she had blue blood.
Same name as Akhenaten's wife.
Atun, Ida, Akhenaten's wife. Thank you. Right, very, very nice. Whereas Enlil's mother, by the same father Anu, was called Urash. Uru Asa. Is there a clue there? Right? And the story, the famous story was that I want to tell a little more of the background before I tell this part of the story. The background is that these two halves of the family, they had a different philosophy about how to grow up DNA. In this half of the family, they believed the way to grow up DNA was to prevent it from changing. So on this side of the family, DNA that changes is by definition weak. Okay? And that's basically the fallen Dracu, at least on the fallen side. Now remember, a small portion of the Seraphim High Dragon bloodline, only a small portion of it, had a genetic disaster, which is loss of implosion in DNA, loss of ensoulment, called Nephilim. No phi in them, Nephilim. Okay? So only a small part of the giant dragon family had that genetic disaster, but the rest of the family of the Seraphim were heartbroken about the mess. Okay? And so how this genetic disaster happened, the Nephilim, the fall, is a big part of our story. And the Nephilim story is in part this family. So how did this genetic disaster happen? Remember, on this side of the family, they had evolved to a situation where preventing DNA from changing was the agenda.
So lack of evolution, lack of mutation.
That's right. That to prevent mutation, you kept elaborate genetic records. And the Seraphim genetic records are called the Mormon tablets, for example. And this is a culture designed to prevent DNA from morphing, basically.
So basically it's extreme inbreeding, which...
That's reptilian, yes. And so, but another aspect of that was that this reptilian DNA he brought was recessive. It had to be inbred, so that both fits here. So we want to understand first what was the philosophy of the two halves of the family. On this side, if you plant a forest, your reason for planting a forest was to plan to cut it down. On this side of the family, if you plant a forest, your reason for planting the DNA was to plan to set it free in order to learn from it. Now, I'm oversimplifying here, but that's basically a difference in philosophy, yeah? It's a farmer's philosophy. Yeah? So here, the harvest procedure is quite different.
But it's also right brain and left brain.
In a way, it's many things. And remember, this is an overgeneralization, and this is an archetype. And we're not here to insult anybody, but we're trying to understand the history. Yeah. So, on these sides of the family, this side of the family began to, well, actually, the story is that the galactic core cultures planted the Dracu in the Orion sector because it was a long way from downtown. No. Actually, well, really, not that it was a bad place. Actually, it was just such a place that required a fierceness in order to survive. In fact, the family later asked, well, why did you put the Dracu here in our Orion sector? We don't like them. And the galactic core culture said, look, the Orion sector was such a tough place to settle that you needed fierce survival instincts. And the Dracu had fierce survival instincts. So they had a reason for putting the Dracu in the Orion sector. Well, anyway, the local history was then that they began, and this story is told in, I'm running out of space on this board here, in the book Guardians of the Grail by Robert Morningsky. Guardians of the Grail. Okay? And Morningsky is reporting on the Hopi history they learned from the ETs. And they're reporting on the evolution of the Asa Uru. The feared and dreaded Asa Uru. Right? And what he's saying here is that the Dracu line had conquered, using later fear and terror, most of the inhabitable planetoids of the Orion sector. And the only culture that they encountered which could resist them was called the bird dog, which became Dogon, which became Weolawa. And the bird dog culture is basically this culture. And Antu, here on Sirius A, has a piece of the bird dog culture. This is the contrast, bird tribe versus the reptile tribe. And so a treaty was set forward that could end these Orion Wars. Because by that time, they had killed the Lyran civilization, if you read Prism of Lyra, which had millions of humanoids that died the day they blew up the whole Lyran star system. And the women on Lyra who had red hair were valued because the extra iron solubility made psychokinesis. And this became the story of the witches, and there's lots of pieces of that puzzle. You see, we have some smiles back there. So, so the day the Lyran civilization was blown up here, it was realized that a truce was needed in the Orion Wars, and that truce involved that the bird dog kings would accept in marriage an assigned telepathic Orion Queen Asa Uru, Reverend Mother, who would report telepathically back to the ruling culture on the activities of the bird dog king. So now, if you see the role of Reverend Mothers in Dune, and Dune has more accurate history than the Bible, honestly. It's true. So the bird dog king, in this case Anu, had to accept a marriage with a hive mind telepathic queen.
So you just passed through something that seemed very significant. The whole not wanting to change genetics, was that to create a hive mind?
Actually, remember,
the closer to the morphic resonance, i.e. ants, bees, whatever, the more hive mind you're going to create.
That's the right question. This all has to do with what's the difference between individuation versus hive mind. That's this whole story. Or Borg mentality. So the whole story is about that, so we should investigate that a little bit. Remember, in the ancient Seraphim culture, this is a very high culture. Their charged fields are so coherent that they can steer star systems. These are the time navigators, the high-winged dragons. This was a powerful culture. But in the process of this fall, they lost track of the pure principle that allowed DNA to implode and get ignited with bliss. Remember, the title of our story is Ignition of DNA. So, in the process of losing track of what was keeping DNA on fire, there was desperation. How do we keep our DNA from decaying? Oh, let's make genetic records of the history of the last 1,000,000 years and keep track so the DNA doesn't decay anymore. This is the seraphim. This is who Joseph Smith was talking to at the origin of the Mormons, right? We must track our DNA so it doesn't fall apart even more. Oh my God. Oh, goodness that we should ever set it free. That would be scary. Well, it isn't. So this was a failure to recognize the primal intelligence of DNA, obviously. This was an insult to DNA. But the insult to DNA that resulted in hive mind, do you know why total telepathy prevents compassion? If you... Yes.
We don't need to feel.
It's all good. Excellent. Very good answer. Very good. Go to the head of the class, Ron.
Thank you.
Yes. If you never feel separate, you can't feel the agony of what it is to be separate, and so you can't experience the need for compassion, which initiates the turning inside out, the feeling, precisely. So in this culture, they had evolved an extreme telepathy, and that telepathy is related to the gold powder story, which we're about to get to. So let's see if I put my gold powder in here. I did, I thought. The gold powder. Oh, the gold powder story. So, the problem of the advancing telepathy and the decay of individuation had everything to do with the addiction to the real gold powder. And that's what we must understand here in terms of the cause of the Nephilim fall. That's where we're going with this story. So, the wars had been murderous. This culture had welded themselves to too much metal. They had evolved a technology to create a form of immortality. The suspensors around Harkonnen, Ariel, Sharon in life support, same physics, yeah? This is a Borg phenomenon. And, yeah, and so they were now using metallic systems to support DNA, but the direct result of that was DNA stopped imploding. So suddenly they've got an evolved technology involving metal to prevent aging, but their DNA keeps decaying faster. Oh my God, they got a problem. So in this culture, originally, when a high telepathic dragon queen, Asa Uru, containing thousands of generations of genetic memory, was ready to die, 10,000 years these dragons would live to be, 5 to 10,000 years. When she was ready to die, she would normally pass on her hive mind memory to the next queen with a skull touch, in which a spark, piezoelectric bone, passed, called Baphomet. And the new queen would enter a swoon and would wake up with the dream with 1,000 generations of tribal memory. When they lost the ability to have that level of charge density and bliss, they began to use quartz crystal skulls to do that, which sadly were not implosive and became control devices and was evidence of the problem, not the solution, actually. Yes? Because remember, the electrical signature of quartz is hex. The SiO2 bond is a cubic lattice with a hex top view of the quartz helix and is non-implosive, and that's the problem, not the solution. Which is why people who use just the quartz bowls actually have astral hygiene problems, whereas people who use quartz with gold maybe have a little bit more of the potential implosion. Anyway, we digress. So another aspect of this part of the story was that their way of producing psychoactive kids, star navigators, guild navigators, those who could make gravity in their genes, their technique for evolving the advanced ones involved feeding them something called the oil of Messe. Messe means crocodile juice. And it was the reptilian juice. It was a highly psychoactive, melatonin, serotonin-rich menstrual blood called starfire. And this menstrual blood's name, Messe, is the origin of our word Messiah. A Messiah is one who has been fed the oil of Messe. And it serves the function exactly of royal jelly in a beehive. So kids who get that high melatonin, serotonin-rich menstrual blood evolve an explosion of growth in the high glands at a very young age and become gravity-making star navigators, highly psychoactive, shamanic, etc., etc. Their high gland structure gets extremely well nourished. Yeah. So this was a way of breeding the leaders of the dragon tribe. The part of the skill that required to generate this was an advanced lineage of what we could call Vestal virgins, who were women who had access to bliss. And their access to bliss process in the temple, which is a capacitor, allowed their blood to be fired, and they could make this starfire. Sadly, they lost the skill to keep that culture alive, and so there was no more melatonin, serotonin in that blood, and their Messiah culture began to decay, and they needed a substitute. Okay? The substitute was the gold powder. That substance would form a kind of substitute for this starfire. And it's true that if you eat the gold powder, your eyes turn blue and you live forever, supposedly. But they maybe missed the fine print on the medicine bottle, may cost you your soul. And that's what we want to discuss. The nature of implosion here is chemically induced. So yes, your DNA gets the phase conjugation to go through a black hole, but the phase conjugation path is mechanically induced and therefore painful. Yeah. So this is the real David Hudson's generated monatomic gold. Now, when you eat the stuff, what happens is your DNA's electric field is induced externally toward fractality, and it induces implosion in the DNA. The mechanical result is that you hear your ears ring, like Kundalini onset, but the ringing is mechanically induced. The normal ears ring is called sangreal, sound current sung in the blood, and it is the voices of your ancestors. The problem is that if you get too many radio stations and you haven't built the tuner, that's called schizophrenia. And so this is what happens when you get the gold powder addiction. You get all these radio stations in your DNA, but you don't have the beingness implosively to be the tuner, and the result, as both diagnosed, is called fractionation of the personality. The Chinese, for example, would eat a thin film of gold on their cake, and it does have profound colloidal gold function, and a little bit is useful to biology, but it's tricky. And they didn't understand all this very well, sorry. They really didn't understand. So, Zecharia Sitchin says, the reason they came here to mine the gold, looking for a heart of gold, because they were growing old. Zecharia Sitchin says, the reason they came here to mine the gold was because they were using it to repair the home atmosphere. Which is true, and good physics, but it's essentially a cover story. More importantly, they were eating the gold. It's called manna in the Bible, the spice in Dune. It was served in a round white wafer, which is the origin of Holy Communion. And eating white wheat flour is pretty stupid, I think. Anyway. So the ability to create the chemistry to do this became later the Ark of the Covenant story and the banking economy of the Essenes. So now we've set this background. Now we can understand a little bit more about what's happening on Sirius A. Sirius A is a culture that's under the thumb of the Dracu. But on Antu, the king is sympathetic to the remnant humanoid culture that has survived in the migrations from the Lyran Wars. So now I'm going to show you a slide from Stuart Swerdlow from his experience at Montauk and the various ET races involved in cooking up Earth DNA. And this is an excerpt from my article, soulinvitation.com/invasion. And I'm going to show you the 12 primary, I think it's 12, primary ET races involved in cooking up Earth DNA. Can't see it very well. I'll read it for you. So this is called the Founders of the Galactic Federation, over 110 colonies, roughly associated with what we're calling the galactic core cultures here. Yeah? And here is the original galactic civilization, kind of a humanoid home. Some say some of this DNA actually came from Earth way far back. But anyway, there's a huge humanoid civilization here that was wiped out when the Draco, the Alpha Draconis, had this war, and millions died here. And there was a diaspora, and escapees, the humanoid remnant, went to all these Rigel, Procyon, Arcturus, Antares, there's Nordic, there's Tau Ceti, we should have, yeah, Procyon. Procyon and Tau Ceti were non-interventionists. The Sirius A was called non-interventionist, but they would sell guns to both sides of the war any day. Anyway, you see here the Sirius A is the primary origin of Egypt and the Hebrews. And this is kind of where we're telling this part of the story. Okay, the Sirius A, origin of Egypt and the Hebrew. This is where we are with right here. Okay? The story is that this culture here had intended that the genetic influences on Earth would actually be a fractal of the Orion Wars, so they could breed a vaccine. That's the story. And the story is that Enki was actually forced to be harmonically inclusive in his genetic experiments here for political reasons back here. But that's backing up in our story. We want to tell the local story. The local story is here that Antu, because of his sympathy with the remnant humanoids who were losing. Remember, here now, the empire is striking back. Antu does something illegal in this Draco culture, and that is he creates a DNA that is more psychoactive than is allowed. And so he is concerned about the empire striking back, and in fact, this is the Terminator story. It's quite real here, actually. So the rest of this story about the bloodline of Enki and all the major civilizations of Earth and the empire striking back has roots back here. Yeah. So Anu is sympathetic. The humanoids are losing. They lost. They're in bad shape. The Asa Uru are winning. They're a mechanical culture, female-dominated, telepathy-ruled, highly metallic, and they are not interested in evolving more psychoactive DNA. From their point of view, a psychoactive DNA, a highly powerful shaman, could mess up the computer on a starship warship, and that's not good. So we got to keep these psychoactive humanoids from evolving. This is more the fallen Nephilim point of view. The high culture here is totally aware that you've got to set DNA free or your stars are going to fall apart. But the Nephilim here have these misunderstandings. Oops. And this is what we need to fix by understanding this. So now we're telling this little part of the story so we can see how this politic became Earth. Anu, because he's sympathetic with the humanoids who have lost, agrees to a marriage, the assigned telepath from the Orion Queen Asa Uru, Ida. And Ida is from Rigel in Orion, and she has blue blood, winged Patau, 11th dimensional DNA. And so, meantime, Anu's regular wife, Urash, they have a son who is Enlil. There's some argument whether he came first or second, but he got the brotherhood primacy. He gets assigned politically to be in charge of the Earth experience later, because he is the elder in the Anunnaki numbering system to say who is the first son. But meantime, Anu's wife, Ida, produces Enki, who has some DNA that's high winged dragon, Patal, Quetzalcoatl. The whole winged dragon story comes from right here, the blood there. This is the bullet in the furnace. This blood behind Enki. Now Enki is not exactly a hero. He's a klutz. He rushes in where angels fear to tread, makes messes all the time. He's a rebel. He could be a double Scorpio. He could qualify. But he does have some very interesting DNA. So anyway.
Who is his father?
Pardon?
Who is his father?
Dad is Anu. This is Dad.
Dad,
Antu, the king on Sirius A, is the father of both Enki and Enlil. But there's different mothers. This is called East of Eden, which is the name of the town I was born in.
Different mother.
Yeah. Same dad, different mother, East of Eden, the whole story. And my brother's name was Michael. It really sort of fits. Anyway, so Ida gets jealous. The fact that Anu and Urash actually have a love relationship. Whereas Ida is basically an assigned queen there to do the telepath reporting back. And she was not actually supposed to have a kid. That's explained in Dune, yeah? Who was the father in Dune? Leto. He was not supposed to have a kid there. That was not part of the plan. These Reverend Mothers said, "Oh, you did something illegal having a psychoactive kid. Oh my goodness." So Anu knows that he has to hide the psychoactive son, Enki. So anyway, Ida gets jealous of Urash and arranged for her to basically get killed. Enlil's not very happy about the fact that his mother got murdered by the half-wife. This is bad news. So you have a little bad blood between the brothers here. Do you see that? This is an ancient root. If you want to do shamanic recapitulation here, you need to know the family story. So what evolved here was Anu now has 2 sons and he has lots of problems. His solution to this, first of all, Sirius A and the complex there is losing its atmosphere, and the gene pool is losing its implosion, so he has more problems than he can shake a stick at, man. The guy's in trouble. But he persuades this culture to spend lots of money for an artificial genetic engineering planet called Nibiru, which is basically a metal artificial planet that's towed in behind asteroids. And in this case, it's a gold mining genetic engineering planet. And he learns that back on Earth, there's gold in them thar hills. Remember that not only was the Earth's, remember, I don't know if we
didn't talk about
we didn't talk about that. We have to talk about that. So
Location.
that's exactly where we're going. Thank you very much. You got the kids are ahead of me. I like that. That's perfectly fine. So gold and psychoactive DNA both require star systems that are fractal. So you don't get gold and psychoactive DNA unless you got fractal star systems. So thanks for reminding me we didn't look at this yet. So here is the Japanese woodcut. Here is the 3-dimensional gravity wind that is the Orion sector. 2 light cones, Yod and Va. Yod and Va. 2 light cones, Ontarian conversion. Here's Rigel, here's Alnitak, Alanam, and Nantaka. Alnilam is called the central belt star, Telos 1 or Stargate 1, Bellatrix, Betelgeuse. And this is Rigel, Enki's mom's home. And so that electrical geometry, well, later we see that it's projected in flatland on Giza, 300 places on the Giza Plateau that map the Orion star map. There's a reason for that. It's a lens to project the charge field of group bliss by morphic resonance back into the home in the stars. So like the Romans built roads, the ETs built roads home. This is a road home. Yeah? Alpha Draconis at Angkor Wat. And you have the Orion star map. And obviously the 3 belt stars of Orion perfectly fit the 3 pyramids alignment. And the center of the heart of Orion is pregnant. Stars are being born there at an alarming rate. So this becomes a morph structure in which I play the little animation. So if you were going into a lucid dream in the Great Pyramid and need your aura steered to a place in the stars, your aura seeks the place by morphic resonance that could... Here is the point we're making. I better stop this here. So remember, here's our implosion cone. And here, the solar system is right there. So if you calculate the right angle and declination astronomically, Pleiades and Sirius are at a 60-degree right angle declination with respect to the solar system. That's called, and here's Orion straight at the midheaven. You should recognize that cone by now. That should be familiar to you. This arrangement of stellar masses into the geometry of recursion creates a gravity wind, which the Hopis called Pesh May 10, 1 less than 10, the way of the 9, the deep space 9, and the 9 Atun who taught the writer of Star Wars, yeah, with Phyllis Schlemmer. So this gravity wind was navigable by these star navigators genetically. And this was a trade wind to motorize commerce among stars. Big bucks here. money is to be made. Remember in Deep Space Nine? Location, location, location. The solar system had access to the fractality. So not only could you breed more gold, because gold only occurs where ley lines cross in a fractal, but in planets like that, you could breed DNA that could get more psychokinetic. Very valuable real estate, worth fighting over. So, anyway, I just finished a little animation since it's so much fun. You can see how that ability to enter that compression wave became the political agenda of the various Orion star maps. And we're going to show the other Orion star maps in a minute. But you see this embedding process here, navigating to the heart of Orion, and we won't play this whole animation, but just see that astronomically, this is pregnant. So obviously you're going to need a lot of gene pools to be squirted into here to create the gravity force to suck star births into sustainability. So whole gene pools are needed to inhabit the heart of Orion, because it is from there that star births can be made sustainable. In the high angelic magic, this would be called the birth of angels, the real Ophanum advanced. This is the movie Stargate. Again, advanced stuff. But so that geometry became Orion star map in the American Southwest. See Papu. This is again the Orion star map in the American Southwest. And this is the symbol called Antarian conversion, the universal symbol for Orion. And you see where that came from. We discussed it. There's a light cone. Too many movies, too little time. We're going to do him. We're going to do Stephen Cardino tomorrow. But here, see this? This is called Ontarian conversion.
Do you have that slide in the books that you have, or in the CD you gave us?
Yes, this is all soulinvitation.com/Orion, which is on your CD, although this is a slightly updated version thereof, but yes. So you can begin to see the background of this story here, that they discovered that the Earth, being so fractal, has gold in them, our hills, and now they realize that A, their atmosphere is going away, and they think gold is the fix, and their DNA's implosion is going away, and they think gold is the fix. So they need the gold. So he persuades the Seraphim culture to spend a lot of money on an artificial mining planetoid, and manages to hide his son's psychokinesis on board. In the first and second trip, I think Enki alone goes later. Enki and Enlil both go. And they arrive here and start the genetic engineering and gold mining operations called Sumeria. Sumer, by the way, means dragon in many cultures. S-U-M-M-A-I-R-E. As does Kuma, Sanat Kumara. K-H-U, Kumara. A Kumara, Kumodo is a dragon. Yeah.
Kama Sutra.
Kama Sutra, Kam Asa-u. Yeah? So, this ancient culture had arrived here with a genetic problem. Now, the standard order mining equipment there was the paramagnetic stone skill to use dolmen, a capacitor, to arrange them, and we talked about that if you put 6 powerful paramagnetic stones in the right symmetry embedded in the land, you can create an electric field that prevents cellular aging. And that was called Garden of Eden. The reason Sitchin says Eden means spaceport, but actually he doesn't understand how capacitance inhibits aging. And that's very important because, in fact, when they arrived here, they were expecting to live to be 5 to 10,000 years old. They arrived in the atmosphere of Earth, and suddenly, they're aging really fast. Oops. So they needed to discover how to prevent that aging. Sadly, this technology came from Sirius A, ability to build capacitors to prevent aging, and basically they forgot how to use it, the klutzes. Because one of the symptoms of this Nephilim fall, remember, the Nephilim fall has many symptoms. Loss of long-term memory was one of them.
Alzheimer's.
Basically. And loss of ability to lucid dream, loss of ability to take memory through death, loss of ability electrically to radiate capacitance to make an immune system in their babies.
Heavy metal contamination.
Yeah, exactly. That would be related. So, for example, when the Dracos screwed with the Khmer, the reticulum, which we call the Greys, they lost the ability to make an immune system in their babies. I mean, it's bad news, and we're going in that direction real fast as a gene pool,
So
unless we learn these.
I was trying to get clear exactly what it was that caused the Neophyte,
The Nephilim.
Nephilim to go into the fallen state. Was
Yes.
it their life, like their lifestyle being too technologically oriented? Was that the cause, or was there an event of causing an
there's
event?
genetic disease.
There is a story told by a dragon queen. Her name is Corinna Muller from Milan, and had memory. And she claims to recall a particular battle in the Dracu culture where, they were fiercely survivalistic and warrior-like. And in that particular battle, they suffered what was akin to a nuclear blast that mutated their gene pool. And at that point, instead of having one heart, they had two hearts. We know in Phil Schneider and others' personal reports of the Draco at Dulce that they had two hearts and were highly telepathic, hard to kill. And the split heart was, in some ways, an end to the possibility of real compassion. And this is repeated in some of the myths. So that's a piece of the story. Another piece of the story is the loss of bliss making in the blood for the Vestal Virgin culture, and addiction to gold powder, and use of too much metal in their environment. And all of those things cause DNA to lose charge.
2 stars, 2 hearts.
2 stars, 2 hearts, twinning.
For teaching.
So we had 2 comments here. One is that about the money aspect. Classically, this culture then becomes a culture that regards harvesting DNA like banking. And so the origin of banking insurance, which is credited to the Templars, actually came from the Dracu, who were harvesting hundreds of planetoids in a similar way. And this, your story about creating a gene pool that then rebels, this culture creates at least 3 different gene pool experiments on Earth. And like the Lemurian, they basically get out of control and get away and escape from the Matrix. And
Does
so,
that mean you don't go through the sun? Just take the longer route and go somewhere else?
well, the humanoids who escaped, the Lemurian story is the humanoids won, Lim Uru. The humanoids won against the Uru by a nuclear blast which destroyed the atmosphere. And so the remnant humanoids had to go underground, and their blood is said to have changed from green to red, chlorophyll to heme, because they no longer had the access to the oxygen, and they had to use iron to hold fix oxygen in blood. And that's where we got the Adamic race, which is the next one, which means red man or iron man. So the first attempt, the Lemurian, is actually a genetic experiment that got away from the Dracu culture, escaped the Matrix. And this series of rebellions is described in several books, actually. So yes, creating a gene pool that then gets away. And so there are many reasons politically why Enki is legally required not to give too much psychokinesis to his genetic experiments. And when he used his own sperm here, and that's the next part of the story, that was highly illegal. So here's what happened. Just brief, most of you know this part of the story, but the gold mining operations were a pain in the ass. These Anunnaki couldn't handle it, and so they needed to make some gold mining slaves. There was a rebellion in South Africa. Remember that Enki is assigned to South Africa, which later became the word Kilimanjaro, meaning Enki. And Enlil is assigned to North Africa. So you have the white race here. And here Enki, remember, Enki's blood is blue-black from back here. So you have the black pharaoh, the Nubian, the Coptic, and the story that the black pharaoh that became Akhenaten, who was black. And so later when Akhenaten changed his name to Moses, in the statue at Rennes-le-Château, you see that the devil Lucifer, who's really Enki, is black. He has horns, Moses, Akhenaten, horns. And he is, in the statue, holding up Magdalene. And so clearly Magellan's blood comes from Lucifer. And this drove Saunier insane at Rennes-le-Château. He couldn't handle when he discovered the history. But the history is true. The guy that he was calling the devil is basically the father of his hero, Magellan. Oops! We got our PR a little screwed up here, didn't we? And so this is the black and white story of the whole Rennes-le-Château. And there's whole new books about what drove Saunier nuts. Anyway, so Enki, blue-black bud, Chem, became the name for Egypt from Axis, the place of blackness and chemistry and alchemy, has this assignment. He says, look, I could take some of the local Cro-Magnon and make some gold mining slaves by upgrading their DNA slightly. And he sends a message back to Sirius A on 2 and says, hey, Dad, we could get this gold mining back on track if we made some gold mining slaves over here. And Enlil, Michael, correctly, Yahweh, says, no, Dad, that's illegal in our culture. It would interfere with the guild right of star navigating. He was right. Thou shalt not interfere with indigenous gene pools. The prime directive. And by the way, when the Andromedans categorize all the 22 different ETs who mess with our DNA, the two categories are interventionist and non-interventionist, right? So Procyon, Tau Ceti, Sirius A, Andromeda, Arcturus, these are non-interventionist cultures. Whereas the interventionists, you have Alpha Draconis, Sirius B. So this was a non-interventionist rule, and Anu cables back. He says, well, I know it's against the rules, but look, we're going to die without this here gold powder, so he gives Enki the go-ahead. Now, the neat thing about that is that Enki picked the why did Enki pick the Cro-Magnon he did?
The exercise compassion.
Thank you. Go to the head of the class. Enki noticed that one of the local apes was seen actually exhibiting compassion to the other animals. This was shockingly interesting. The real physics here, it means that phase conjugation was still operative in some of the high monkeys there. So this was a highly vibrant DNA that actually had compassion. And so this created a DNA that was actually dominant over Enki's own reptilian DNA, was recessive, was less strong. Their DNA was weakening. Anyway, so Enki basically rapes an egg. For the first bunch, he used Cro-Magnon DNA and Cro-Magnon eggs, but these were not fertile. And then he decides he needs a fertile, the first Eve, and so he takes a Cro-Magnon egg, and it's a kind of rape. And this is how we need to understand. Yes, go ahead.
The Cro-Magnon, they were from Earth.
Yes.
They had been born.
Indigenous from rather ancient Earth. And perhaps their ancient roots of these Cro-Magnon were related to the bloodlines on Lyra. That's part of the story, that the ancient home of a lot of DNA came from Earth millennia, millions of years earlier.
That's a chicken or egg question.
That it is. It's kind of a Groundhog Day story here. So the Cro-Magnon egg, you know, the story is that you're doing shamanic recapitulation, rebirthing for the whole gene pool. Now you need to get back to the moment of conception. Hello. Because that's how you do rebirthing, right? So here's the rebirth. Look, a little rape going on here, a little pain in the past. So the Cro-Magnon egg is raped, really, and put in his half-sister, Ninhursag, Inanna, depends who you believe. Hog, Mag, Magog, Sog, Hag. Og, you see the word Mag here. Og means fire going within, and Mag means matrix or mother of fire. Yeah? So fire in the blood comes from the Mag. It's really true, ignited blood. So the theme, remember, ignition of blood, title of the story. So half-sister Ninhursag Inanna, it gets to be the wet nurse for an egg from a Cro-Magnon. And of course, Enki is promiscuous. This fella is just leaking sperm all over the place. I'm sorry. This guy is a colorful character. Reminds me of, yes, we won't go into it. Yeah. Pardon? Amenhotep. These guys leaked sperm a lot. Which is, I mean, you know,
It's like,
for better or for worse.
You're in the colony.
Yeah, right. So he uses his own sperm in his half-sister Ninhursag Inanna and produces the first fertile female, Eve. Now, we need to know what the word Adam and Eve actually mean.
Whose sperm? Enki's sperm?
Enki's own sperm. He used his own sperm, absolutely.
Inseminate.
He inseminated his half-sister, in whom he had put an egg from a Cro-Magnon.
Okay.
Yeah. As a genetic engineer, I mean, at Dolly the sheep's laboratory, Enki would be regarded as a klutz. Okay? Just about as klutzy as those people there, so it all sort of fits. So Adam and Eve, Adam meant donkey or Borg or slave, literally made by the Anunnaki, Man, made by Anunnaki. Adamic means red race, and the original word for them was Tak Adama, which means the red race created as from the Tak. Tak means Orion. Almatak, Mintaka, Hurtak, Urtak. Ur means dragon from Tak means Orion. H, breathe from Hurtak. Breathe from the dragons of Orion.
So I got where the first Eve came from, but where did the first Adam come from?
So the story of the split rib is actually a genetic operation. It's a cloning function.
Oh, so
I
Adam
think.
and Eve are clones.
I suspect that there's controversy on that one, but I don't think the
It
division
can't
was...
be a clone if one's male and one's female.
It was definitely inbreeding. And Eve's rib, many people interpret to be a genetic engineering story where the rib is actually a haploid DNA. But I don't have a real answer to that question. But clearly, even the Adam and Eve story together is really racial. It's not a story of individuals so much. Just like the story of later in this story, we're coming to it very quickly anyway, the story of Ab, Ra, Am. Ra means sun god, which originally was Enki, and then later Enlil tried to take it over. But Abraham is a name for Enki. And Abraham begat with Sarah, which is Asa of Ra. Sarah, the Asa, dragon queen of Ra, and begats the whole Benjaminic lineage. So, and they came from the city Ur. You see? So this story, which biblically has been interpreted as the names of people, is actually the names of races. And many historians have now concluded that, and I think that's somewhat relevant here as well. This is a description of racial roots rather than individual persons so much, and needs to be interpreted as such.
So in other words, in a way, they were growing in semi-vats races.
That this was an explicit attempt. It's like different versions of Bill Gates software, yes. That this is Enki trying to discover how to make the software work.
So it keeps on rebooting itself all the time.
Exactly, and requires inbreeding to keep the shape-shifting capability. So now, the next part of this story would be basically all the different examples we have of what the bloodline Enki means. Now, here's the different names. Enki went by the word Ea, by the word Atun, by the word Enki, by the word Adonai, and later we have the words Poseidon and the Zeus story, whereas and it actually became called Lucifer. And later it became the word Baal, as in Beelzebub, and Baalbek. And then it became the word Bo, as in Boheme and Bulgaria. So this side of the family had lots of names, many cultures. And this side of the family, Enlil, in Egypt, was called Amun. The Amun-Ra is in our word Amen. And these are the ones who murdered Akhenaten. And then Yahweh, and Michael. You have the Michaelic versus the Luciferic, and also the word Ahrimanic in the Lucifer, in the Steiner terminology, Ahriman. The Ahrimans like computers, the Lucifers don't. Yeah, and very good. And the word Orion, Orion, and Aryan we know what the word An means. The word An means sun god. Ori means you have golden radiance in your aura. Fractality in the charge radiance. Orion. So an Orion, Arion, Orion is one who has radiant, implosive, a gold mane on the lion. We were talking last night. The star elders of these Anunnaki were called the Leonines, the Sekhmet, the secret places of the lion, the Kathmandu, the Sphinx, the lion gods.
And would you comment on the difference in the suffix between an versus al, North America an, India an versus Oriental?
The term El and Al mostly, well, for example, if you were to describe what happens to charge in DNA that does get a soul, it's a translation of vorticity such that the charge goes from the circle to the line. And the drawing of that is an L. So those who are able to make the L or phase shift are the ones who can translate their velocity and memory through the speed of light. For example, step on top of the Moxine light, the quartz cube in secret places of the Andes, and you appear to vaporize. If you're a Tron, you can take your memory with you through the speed of light. That is an L, as in Elohim. Yeah? Now, if we look at the shape of Alpha Draconis, we have some pictures, but the shape of the Alpha Draconis is actually the Arabic letter L. And the central star is Arrakis, which is Dune.
And Elnaton?
Elnatonin.
Pardon me?
Yeah, Eltonin.
And the Eltonin antenna?
So this is all a name for those who... Now, originally L was a name for those who could do it. Later, L became a name for those who were wannabes. We think we ought to be able to, but... So the Elohim later came to describe those who would like to, but they really were having some trouble getting up to speed there. So this becomes a clue then for describing various groups in history. Now let's track this bloodline. Remember, what we have here is a secret and dangerous attempt to breed a bloodline that could re-inhabit stars. That is a political hot potato back up here. Political hot potato. Empire could strike back any time. We're not sure we want this DNA getting out of here because it's powerful, it's dangerous, and it's in quarantine. Terminator's coming. So this becomes the story of trying to hide this bloodline through history, basically. And what we want to do now is track the story of that bloodline in virtually all major cultures of planet Earth. Remember we said in Australia you have snake god versus dolphin god. So in Australia he's called the dolphin god, right? In South Africa he's called Kiliman Jaro. It's Enki. Credo Mutwa explained that to us. He was very helpful. And in Egypt, remember we've got the Atun versus the Amun. So, well, first we've got to deal with Atlantis. So, in the descendants of Enki, his son was called Ningishida in Sumerian. Ningishida, spelled many ways. And in English, this became Thoth. And Thoth was called TWT, which means Tahuti, which in the Bible is spelled DWD, David. So everywhere in the Bible where you read the lineage of David, it means the lineage of Thoth. This is from the academic work of Ahmed Osman, Out of Egypt and House of the Messiah. And later Hermes, when it became Egyptian. But at the time of Atlantis, Thoth Ningishida and his father Enki had designed an electrical environment to save a gene pool called Atlatl. otherwise known as Thule. Thule basically means Enki's experiment, Thoth's experiment, which was the early name for Atlantis. And Atlatl here means, if you check the indigenous use of the term, it means projectile. And literally, if you go to the Native Americans of the American West, an Atlatl is a javelin. And you remember the pictures we have of Atlantis and Amsterdam, that's the concentric rings of water and land, which is how you fabricate a recursive capacitor. It's a projectile. It's a way for taking the charge field of a collective genome and projecting it into stars. Yeah? So, but Atlantis is only one of numerous millennial attempts to try to create a haven for a gene pool that could get psychoactive. Another example is the book Holy Grail Across the Atlantic, or just the Holy Grail story in general, which is the attempt to shepherd and harbor and hide a gene pool that could get psychokinetic. A short version then of the Atlantis story is, in the late stages of that culture, they were using a technology from Sirius A, which was a 6 and 8-sided quartz cylinder suspended in a vacuum and sonically triggered to implode to get voltage from gravity, called fire crystal or Tuoison, Tuoai, as elaborately described by Edgar Casey and discussed by the physicist Sutton from Maryland, the fire crystals of Atlantis, which created an electric field that could get voltage from gravity. It's related to the Moxine light. I don't know if you've heard of the Moxine light. It's an implosive, capacitive quartz crystal. And they even have pictures of the Labradovsky, you know what it's called, where they had a quartz cube that would appear to vaporize, create gravity. Anyway, the Troy stone was used originally as a fire that did not consume, related to the Vril story. This was a technology to couple the gravity field for the voltage to motorize a culture. Sadly, and this came from Sirius A, and they were basically klutzes in using this stuff. They weren't that good at it. They didn't have long memory. But sadly, they used the electric field, which had high-frequency microwave and RF components. They used it then to enslave people. Lots of people, millions of people were enslaved in Atlantis with the crystalline technology of the priests. And the priests involved were the Amun priests, who later migrated to Egypt. So they misused this technology, misunderstood its frequency signature, misunderstood its ability to phase lock their own tectonics. And so the gravity decay of Atlantis is directly related to failure to ignite DNA. So basically, Atlantis, as a place to grow up a gene pool into stars, didn't quite make it. So this then, the fragments of the Atlantean culture became, of course, the Titicaca story, and the Egypt story, and the India story. You kind of know that piece of the puzzle. The thing that's interesting in these various cultures, let's take the various cultures. In Egypt, the line was called Ptah. And Ptah came from Thuth Moses. Thuth Moses is actually a name for sons of Thoth. Moesha means son of Thoth. And Thuth Moses was a name for the kingship line of Egypt. And Ptah was a name for Enki's ancestors. And Kem, the original term for Egypt, meant the place of the black bloods, which was Enki, basically. And later, Atun, which means Enki, became Aku, Atun. Akhenaten. And then Akhenaten in Egypt attempts to build a solar capacitor to ignite DNA. You know the pictures. Oh, we got a little behind in our pictures here. Let's do the pictures. Here, close tab. This is what Enlil looked like. That's a fallen Anunnaki right there. It's a half-blood cross between Ebi and Uru. This is a straight Draco from Alpha Draconis. This is Dracu. Yeah, it's kind of grandma.
And what did Enki look at?
Enki looked close to this, maybe not quite so mean. Here is this is the Sumerian goddess from the Ubayyad. This is Grandma. This is Eve, right? And here is, you see the draconian features on Grandma. Yeah, this is the Uru side of the family. This is from the Sumerian Ubayyad on top, morphed, and on the bottom we've morphed the Celtic description of who Grandma looks like. She's the same person, basically. She's a great ancient dragon, Asa Uru. And that's what these pictures are. And here...
Those are coming from statues?
Yes. The statues are there. These are drawings of the Draco. Now, this drawing is from Anna Hayes, but there are similar drawings from Phil Schneider and others at Dulce, and our friends who have met them. I mean,
what's the triangle between two heads then?
The saying is that the flag of Israel contains the triangle because of the shape of the starcraft from Alpha Draconis. So I guess that might be a Draco starcraft. That's a guess here. And the high ancestors were winged dragons, and this is not a very good picture. The Draco Targ, they call them. And even the winged dragon on Terry's porch up there is interesting to look at. The Siakar Mothman Archon idea. And this here is a little introduction to the lion story. The story was that the Anunnaki maintained a legend that their star elders were the lion gods, the Leonines, which became the Sekhmet story, and why they built the Sphinx, and why the same face is on Mars, because both sides of the interventionist Anuhazi, as they called the Anunnaki at that time, from the Anasazi, that both sides of the family tried to claim that they represented the will and intent of their star elders, the lion gods, the Leonine. So you have secret places of the lion, and why does a lion always guard the door to the temple? The lion's memory guards the door to the access of implosion in the eyeball into the center of DNA. And so at Kathmandu, there's a cat guarding the temple. At Sphinx, you have a lion. The lion guards the temple's gates because it serves you, because if you smell of fear, then when you enter compression, you'll experience heat. So better that the lion could tell you that you're in fear so you don't go in. So smelling for fear from the lion, and this was symbolically the lion ancestors. And Darlene, Vincent Bridges' partner, who runs the Sekhmet website, would be delighted to have you look at that. Akhenaten was basically straight Syrian blood, and he was so ugly they couldn't get a woman to have sex with him. So they used artificial insemination aboard a starcraft from Sirius A. I actually believe that story. The book on that is called God King Akhenaten by Daniel Stewart.
I heard this story.
Yeah. Because basically he had a very scoliosis of the spine, which I have some, and a very descended skull, which I have some, but not as much as he did. A cone head, basically.
His legs articulated backwards.
Yes, and his legs articulated backwards, and big pelvis. He's a strange-looking dude. And this is a Syrian genetic experiment that is not so sustainable, and the guy was basically kind of nuts in some ways. Let's not over-heroize the guy. But anyway, Akhenaten had, his dream was, of course, monotheism, and he created a star map called Amarna, which is related to the story of Solomon's temple. Amarna was Akhenaten's attempt, and I'm going to soulimitation.com/Peru here to show you some pictures of Amarna. Amarna was his attempt to make a solar capacitor that could ignite DNA. I mean, temple is basically a name for an environment of capacitance necessary to ignite DNA. Here's some of William Bueller's. This is called the Rochelle grid. And here's it overlaid on Arthur's seat in Edinburgh. I mentioned William Bueller. This is the Templar agenda, the repair of the fabric of time, and the Rochelle grid superposed on the body of Europe, for example. There's some more advanced pictures of this elsewhere. Notice the recurrent theme here. We're going to talk about this in the star map section, where the overlay of the pent hex becomes the map to Rennes-le-Chateau and Holy Grail. This is all those same ancient dragon ancestors trying to create an electric field to ignite DNA. You asked the right question, dear. She says, was Akhenaten trying to create a star system? Akhenaten was trying to create an electrical environment where humans could accelerate the electric field of their aura into stars. Star temple. Amarna. A star map. What do you do with a star map? Electrically, you create a capacitor in which your aura, your bliss charge field, your Ka, can be squirted back into those stars. That's what so this was a good attempt. The problem was that he blew the checkbook. These damn bird tribes, they never could handle a checkbook. They were the Klutzes, right? Yeah, the King Ludwig. He just messed with the checkbook. Horrible. So the Amun-Ra priests, remember, the very lineage of this side of the family, these are the guys who run the checkbook. They know about checkbooks, right? That's they can handle. They're the bankers, the very origin of banking, yeah? So when Akhenaten has completely wrecked the checkbook, that gives the Amun-Ra priests, the Amun priests, who represent Enlil, a chance to retake power. So the Amun...
They set him up.
They set him up.
No, he's on their side.
Well, Akhenaten, who do you mean who's on their side?
Akhenaten is.
The way I understood the story was Akhenaten...
No. He's a good guy, but he's not.
Well, Akhenaten was schizophrenic, actually. He had lots of troubles. He was psychologically unstable. It's actually very clear. Yeah. But in any case, the situation now where he has blown the checkbook means the Amun-Ra priests get the upper hand, and he has to run for his life. Yeah. And so at that point, the Amun priests make it a crime punishable by death to pronounce the word Akhenaten. So he is called by the shorthand Moeshish, Moses, which simply means son of. In this case, son of the Pharaoh. In the bloodline of. In the same way that Bar is in Barbara and Simon Bar Jonah. Bar means son of. Lineage of Barbar, the barbarian. So, Akhenaten changes his name to Moses and runs for his life. But the neat thing is he did get one thing together. He took the money. So, and the money here is not just the truckloads of gold. The money here is the Ark of the Covenant.
No wonder they were chasing him.
Oh, yes, big time. What happens is that the Ark of the Covenant is a nonlinear orgone accumulator. It's a capacitor, stone and gold, properly layered, and the Ark has an electric meaning.
It also has a form of wood in it.
The wood is a perfect biologic dielectric.
You have to have the biological and the metal and the biological.
That's right.
Acacia.
Acacia, which is a profoundly close-grained, excellent biologic dielectric. So the Ark of the Covenant is a technology from Sirius A, which was commonly used to fabricate the DC spark necessary to make gold powder. So this is the generator engine for making money. So later, this is how the pharaohs really got their big bucks. They would make gold powder and sell it to the royal families all over the planet. And the Essenes did the same thing which Moses started. So Moses runs out, takes the Ark of the Covenant with him, and starts the Essenes.
Is this what's being played out in the Middle East, this aspect of the story?
Well,
I realize it goes in many levels, but
it does.
this is going to piss some people off.
In the Middle East, you have Uruk, which is called Iraq, and Uruk was a repository of other of the Sirius A technologies, which was the dolmenic structure for eliminating cellular aging. And boy, does George Bush need that equipment, because he's losing it fast, right? I mean, this gives you a little flavor. The whole bloodline which George Bush represents is desperate to get the last pieces of the Sirius A technology, which was mining equipment. And the mining equipment had to do with preventing cellular aging. Anyway, going back to this story then of the right in the Middle East, I have to say that we forgot one piece of this story, is that when Enki and Enlil first made their nuclear war in the Sinai, we can still see the molten glass today, they so angered the half-sister Inanna Ninhursag that she takes off for the Orient and establishes the dragon cult there. And you have this whole Sanskrit, Vedic, dragon, Alpha Draconis, star map at Angkor Wat. But there, she did not take Enki's blood. So in that whole Oriental culture, which is the Mongolian origins of the Ashkenazi, who became the Bank of England and today's Israel, the Ashoka, the king, that bloodline which usurped the Sephardic, the Ashkenaz, did not have the implosive blood. So,
and their whole representation of the dragon tribes are quite different. They don't consider dragons negative, they consider them very positive.
of course, that's nice.
They're the ones who bring the pearl.
That's right, that's good. And in that culture, the reptilian brain is dominant, the bird brain is not there, pretty much. And also it's illegal for the student to surpass the teacher. And that whole meaning of that is the difference.
And their language is pictographic instead of linear.
Yes, which would be the more reptilian brain dominant kind of neurolinguistic programming. So we're going to come back to that then when we get to the origins of Sanskrit and this Tibetan connection with Bon Po. That's why I wanted to mention that, because that's before this. Yeah, we're now in the birth of the Essenes, and so basically the son of Moses is called Joshua, later called Jeshua, which is Tut, which is Jesus. Now, I know there's several hundred years between the story of Jesus and between the story of Jesus and Moses and the story of Akhenaten and Joshua. However, if you read Ahmed Osman, he explains in detail how the Roman Catholic Church covered that lie, in great detail. And one table from that chart, just to give us the flavor, in soulinvitation.com/invasion, he has the genetic lineage of the Egyptian kings with a crossover to the Hebrews. And let's see if I put that in the right place here now. Again, that invasion index. That chart from Ahmed Osman. Yeah, there it is. Look at that. I even found it. Am I good? Okay, here we go. The Israelites and the royal house of Egypt. Now, this is Ahmed Osman and book Out of Egypt and the other text. Let's see. Unfortunately, with this viewer in Firefox, I can't change the scale easily. But notice that the Thutmose line, Thutmosis, which is the name of the royal kings of Egypt, was David, TWT, Thoth, Tahuti, Thutmose. And this line comes down, and here you see the start of the Solomon bloodline from Thutmose IV. And the bottom of this is kind of the fun part. Nefertiti is the sister of Moses and Mary and the mother of Jesus. And you see this bloodline cross then, the sons of Moses' bloodline from Amenhotep. Now here's Moses, here's the cross with Nefertiti, and here's the kids, Tutankhamun, Jesus. And Akhenaten, who is depicted in the Egyptian cartouche with an alabaster jar. Okay, the symbol of Magdalene. Yeah? So here we have the whole Mag story as directly a story about the Grail and the blood, back to Egypt, back to Atun, back to sun god.
So once again, we have the story of the brother and sister mating.
Yes, actually, when they said that the Essene two leading royal families, the Benjaminite and the Davids, became the Jesus Magdalene, so that the royal families of the Essenes phase conjugated to make Messiah, what they're really saying is that Akhenaten's children became Moses, the founder of the Essenes, and monotheism, unified field physics, and that phase conjugated to become Tutankhamun Akhenaten. So the point is that by hiding the blood roots in Egypt, the Roman Catholic Church had made a rather dastardly political decision. And that's what Ahmed Osman is explaining pretty well, I think. Namely, that at the time of the Council of Nicaea, which Roman emperor was it that ran the Council of Nicaea? Constantine. Yes. He decided, well, gee, it's pretty expensive to be babysitting all these religion wars, and why don't we make a state religion? Roman Catholic. And so he invited all the bishops in to have an argument, and then he told anybody that didn't agree to hack off the Egyptian roots would be killed. So the bishops who voted yes got to have their money, and the bishops who didn't agree got to be dead. And that's the origin of the Roman Catholic Church, really. And at that point, the Egyptian origins of the bloodline were officially made illegal, punishable by death for anybody who whisper that. And what you need to understand is the history of banking is the other side of the family. And they're always jealous that Enki had to fund DNA, and so they had to keep covering it up, basically. I mean, there's lots of levels to that description. So at that point, the religion is disempowered for the feminine, the meaning of Magdalene in terms of her ancestors, that induces a huge schizophrenia, which is painful to the shamanic roots of our whole bloodline, which is why it's so important to go back to see these shamanic roots. Now, if we see where this goes, then Tutankhamun goes out to try to save the life of his father in the desert and ends up strung up in a tree, crucified, by a guy named Panhasi. Is it Panhasi? Anybody remember? And you can read in the Jewish text, the guy who killed Jesus is actually an Egyptian Amun priest. So this story of the Essene roots then becomes, remember the Benjamin line, Joseph had the cup of many colors, the coat of many colors, which means raiment or braid in his DNA. Many colors in his coat. Joseph's Technicolor coat, you know what that is? How many recursive braids are in his DNA? And then how charged radiant would be his ultraviolet and capacitive field. And the harmonic inclusiveness of his aura electrically. And Benjamin had the gold cup in the seeds. Remember the story of Benjamin? The gold cup was hidden in the seeds. The gold cup is the grail of charge fractality in the roots of his genetic seed, the sperm. And the Benjamin line becomes the story of Magdalene, which we now know is Akhenaten, and the Benjamin line then becomes the story of Arcadia.
These are the gold eaters.
These are the gold eaters, yes, yes. That Arcadia is the Greek descendants of the Essene Benjamites. And this becomes Et in Arcadia Ego in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Arcade means those of the branch, like the word Scion and Scion and Zion means those of the branch. Scion means to branch, as in the word science, to branch perfectly, which relates to our word divine. Anyway, the Arcadia became known as the Bow, as in the Boheme and the Bugaresh, Bugarat, and the Bulgarian. And so this bow line became the story, always this descendants of this lineage. So repeatedly we're tracking this through history. We're tracking the repeated attempts to create a psychokinetic bloodline in a culture where that is essentially illegal. You know, in a George Bush culture, it's almost illegal to get bliss. Everything possible is done to prevent bliss. Vaccination, metal cities, fear, dead food. The entire culture is exquisitely designed to prevent all DNA from imploding.